Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Intuition Incubator interview. I'm Carolyn Beauchamp, the author of the recently published book, Horses to Higher Consciousness Riding the Cosmic Current. And my book is an inspirational memoir based on my life and based on my journey of learning how to trust my own intuition and really listening to the voice within as opposed to the voice or voices without. And the book really was the inspiration for the Intuition Incubator interviews. And I am honored and privileged today to be joined with Linda Rodgers. Linda is amazing. She's an educational assistant, author, and advocate for safer, more compassionate schools. With years of frontline experience supporting children and educators, she brings a grounded, heart centered perspective to the complex emotional and relational challenges facing today's classrooms. Her work is shaped not only by professional training, but by lived experience, including navigating the realities of school violence and the lasting emotional impact that it can have on educational workers and students alike. Linda's work is informed by training in neuroscience, mental health, and suicide prevention. Alongside her daily work in schools, she's passionate about bridging science, lived experience, and practical application in ways that feel accessible and human. As a thought leader and a change agent, she believes that addressing emotional and relational needs is not an extra in education, but a necessary evolution for the world students are growing into. And Linda's also an author and bridge builder working at the intersection of emotional intelligence, education, and cultural change. With over 3 decades of frontline experience, her work explores what becomes possible when systems shift from control toward connection. She's the author of Embrace Your Spark, a guide to emotional and relational intelligence in the classroom. Welcome, Linda. I'm so honored to have you here today.
I'm thrilled to be here also, Carolyn. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this conversation and be here with your community. It means the world to me that we get to have this conversation today.
Wow, well, it means the world to me too. And when our audience hears you, I'm sure they're going to feel the same way. So, okay, before we talk about your work, I want to talk about you. What was going on in your world, in your life, when your transformational journey began with what you're doing?
Well, I had a lot going on, so much so that I had to step back from my career for a little bit. But before I get into that part, let me tell you a little story about when I made the decision that changed everything for me. So I was coming home from an appointment. I was driving alone in my vehicle, and I had just been going through it, and I was just overcome with emotion. I was so tired of feeling the way I felt, and the tears were streaming down my face. And I had to pull over because I just couldn't see the road anymore. And I had to pull over to the side of the road. And I sat there alone in my car, trying to come to terms with what was happening in my life at the time. And I made a decision in that moment that really set me on a path of healing. I grabbed my phone and I dialed this sexual assault hotline. I was finally going to ask for the help I should have asked for years before. And so I got on the phone, I called and was put on hold until a very nice lady came on the phone and said, "Yes, Linda, I hear that you're ready to get some help, and we're here to help you. But the thing is there's a wait list, and the wait list is 1 year long at least." Now I was devastated because I had finally made the decision. I decided I was ready for healing. And to be told that it wasn't accessible right away was just devastating to me. But I decided I wasn't going to stop there. I was going to take on my healing journey on my own. So I accessed help. I went to see another healer, another energy healer and personal coach who helped to guide me. I studied science because I wanted to understand what was going on in my mind and in my body. I studied trauma. I studied trauma therapy so that I could know how to help myself and hopefully, eventually, someday, help others. But that was just the tip of the iceberg because during that time period, I was also experiencing the loss of my marriage of 22 years. And I was also experiencing workplace violence. I work as an educational assistant with some of the school's most challenging students, and I love them. I love my students. But sometimes physical violence, emotional violence is part of what I experience when I'm at work. And I had been working with this student for 4 years, one of the toughest cases I had ever worked with. And I didn't realize how much I'd been holding until he had to finally move on to another program. So all that happened at the same time. But then my identity got stolen on top of everything else. And my daughter, who's neurodivergent, she was diagnosed with a rare heart condition and lost the ability to support herself. So I was her only source of support, and she lost the ability to drive, so I had to drive her to and from all of her appointments. And then suddenly I found myself in the care of a cancer treatment center. All of this happened just before the pandemic, when the entire world shut down and access to all treatment ended. And then I really had to take on my own healing journey. I had to keep moving forward because giving up was not going to be an option. I had made the decision that I was going to change my life for the better, and I did.
Wow, that's an amazing story. So, well, then when the pandemic happened and everything just came to a screeching halt, here we go to trusting your intuition. What happened there that led you to when you said, "Okay, I have to do it myself"? Where did you segue to then? What happened?
Well, I accessed some of the materials that were available online. Uh, Being an educational assistant, I don't have the biggest salary in the world, so money was an issue. And so I accessed all the free content that I could. I went onto YouTube and I followed the work of Joe Dispenza, for example, and Greg Braden, and some of these incredible thought leaders who understood what transformation can look like. And with the help of Joe Dispenza's work, I learned about meditation and I learned about healing the body through thought alone, how our limiting beliefs have an effect on our body, mind, and spirit.
Wow. So yeah, because you mentioned, as I spoke in the introduction with with your bio that you studied neuroscience. So you were taking neuroscience to work with the brain, and then
Hmm.
how did you coordinate it with body? Like what was happening in your body then? Because obviously something was happening because we store the emotions in the body, right?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
what
So I all my life I lived with physical pain, and I lived with a bunch of other symptoms, anxiety and depression, and uh, obsessive compulsive behavior, and I mean the list can go on. But I hadn't connected the dots that all of those were related to one common symptom, which came back to my childhood experiences. I had never processed what had happened and never had the opportunity to rid my body of all the stress and trauma of holding on to all those emotions. And I learned through my studies that the body keeps the score. If you've experienced any of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work, you're familiar with the fact that body stress, when it doesn't get processed, settles in parts of your body and shows up later as pain or as discomfort. And in fact, when I wrote my first book in 2023, it was all about the pandemic trauma. And I used my own experiences with trauma to express the challenges and the concerns we might have related to the long-term stress we experienced during the pandemic. Because I thought if I can live, 40 plus years without realizing I had been living with PTSD all that time, for certain, some people who have experienced the trauma of the pandemic may not know that they have some healing to do. And that was the purpose behind my first book, was to offer this guide to understanding trauma and learning how to heal from it.
Wow, I really love that. And I especially love it because I love the saying, and I say this to my clients as I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, that I say to my
Mhm.
clients, this isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. So it's very interesting what you said because what we call it in hypnosis is, root cause. And the root cause is what's causing all these other symptoms, whether they're emotional, physical, mental, psychological, right? And so the pandemic stopped everything and really forced
Mhm.
you to look at what was going on. And the pandemic was a trigger. It wasn't in and of itself, it was the trauma earlier, but that
Yeah.
allowed you then to say, wow, that you were triggered by the pandemic, and this allowed you to go within and really do the inner work. And it sounds like from what you're saying is you embraced it really because you studied neuroscience. And what else? Tell us what else at that time when you first realized you were triggered and you trusted your intuition to guide you and let the universe guide you, right? What
Hmm.
Tell us a little more about what that looked like. What was that journey? You didn't just like open up a book on neuroscience one day, right? So
No.
so how did you get to that point?
Well, science was definitely an entry point for me. I come from a background where I was raised Catholic, and so I had a set of beliefs that went along with that religion. But some of it didn't always line up with what was happening within me. I didn't understand it all. Like not all of my questions were answered through my religious beliefs. So at some point during that period between then and now, I decided to look into other forms of understanding, and one of which was Kabbalah. I studied a little bit of Kabbalah, and one thing that really drew me to this ancient spiritual law in Judaism is that the Kabbalists believe nothing happens by coincidence, that there is a purpose and a reason for everything we experience in life. And they teach us how to look at those experiences as an opportunity for growth, and I really resonated with that because I had lots of questions, like why was it possible that these things happened to me when I was so young? Like how does that make any sense? What is the purpose? And of course, now that I'm working with children and advocating for children and trauma and so on, it all makes sense. Like now it makes sense. The dots line up. But at the time when I was, it took me 2 years. I stopped working for 2 years to heal because I had that much to work through. So, science played a role in it, spirituality played a role in it, and then just understanding my body through limiting beliefs and meditation and manifestation. And I mean, nothing was off limits in terms of what I could access. Anything I could access that resonated with me, I dove into it and got as much information and consciousness as I could out of every experience.
I love that because the passion, and I really love our audience to hear what you just said because I like to stress too to my clients, what we're passionate about is what we're supposed to be doing. If we have an enthusiasm and a love and an excitement about it, it means we're supposed to be doing that. And I had the same thing happen, and I talk about it in my book about my Catholic upbringing too, and saying
Mhm.
nothing resonated on any level for me. I felt like guilt and shame, and my questions were not answered sufficiently either. And I had to find my own way. But there again, that was our gift of the
Mhm.
families we grew up in. I didn't understand it at the time either, just like you. But then everything I went through in childhood, as you did, then led to what the work we do. Now we can be advocates for others because we've been through the journey. So
Yes.
it's so beautiful to see that and understand that. So everybody out there who's listening to Linda, know that if something is happening in your life, we can reframe it. I like to say, put it in a different
Yes.
frame, right? And
Yeah.
we can really say, okay, how is this happening for me? If this is happening, well, it is happening for me, not if. Since this is happening for me, how can I look at it differently? What am I supposed to learn from it? How can I use this experience to better myself and better the lives of those around me? Right? So these are some of the questions that we can start asking. And I want to hear now, once you did that, and I love it. I love Kabbalah too. I actually am involved in that myself. I love, love, love the uh, the wisdom, the deep, deep wisdom in
Mhm.
it. And same as you, I dabbled in everything I could get my hands on metaphysically, right? I was doing everything known to mankind, which again I wrote in my book too. Channel clearing, soul merge, past life regression. I mean, you
Yes.
name it, I was doing it, right? Breath work, um,
Hmm.
everything, different spiritual disciplines. And I love the fact that you just tried them on. We try on, oh, this sounds interesting, or this sounds like it might be helpful. So we try it on and see where it leads. And there again, that's trusting your intuition. If it feels good, then okay, this feels right. I'm going to go with it. But in the now, it can, bob and weave, it can move, but we just start the journey. And I love that you trusted that. So tell us a little more then how things shifted for you and how did it even get into your work? How did it lead into your work? Well, talk a little bit about that.
That's a great question. I think it was a very gradual transformation. And I remember in the beginning thinking, can I just like skip over this part and get to the good side of things? But I mean, you can't rush the process, right? It has to play out in its own time. And every layer of healing brings an extra layer of consciousness and understanding. And so, as I learned to trust myself and trust my instinct, which was something I hadn't developed the capacity to listen to those inner whispers. I call them winks from the universe, those little
Oh,
intuitions and signs that are happening all around us. If we just pay attention, we'll see them. And so when I started to pay attention to all these little hints coming in from the universe, they became less like a whisper and more like a conversation, if you will. And I told you a little bit about the my first book that I wrote during the pandemic, and
yeah.
or
What
as a
about
result
that?
of the pandemic. And to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't have the reach that I had hoped for because I really wanted to help people. And the whole point of the book was to bring healing to the world. And so I
What's the
think
name
it
of
was
the book? What's the name of the book?
the name of the book is called Shit Hit the Fan, Be Happy Anyway.
I love it.
It was a reflection of what was happening in my life at the time. And, I was juggling so many balls, and it really felt like the shit was hitting the fan during the pandemic for many of us.
Oh, yeah.
So that name kind of just stuck with it. Um, but yeah, on April 8th of 2024, that's when there was a total solar eclipse in my part of the world. And I was
Where
lucky
are
enough to
you?
be,
Where are you? Where are you?
I'm in Southern Ontario in
Oh,
Canada.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually very close to Niagara Falls, 20-minute drive, and I'm right at the base of the falls.
Oh, I've been there. It's
Beautiful country. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
so it was
Yeah.
so tell us more about that event.
So it was the total solar eclipse, and I was lucky enough that in my part of the world, I was in the part of the totality. So we
Oh,
saw like day turn to night. It was really, really incredible. And because it happened during a school day, we didn't have school that day, so then the kids can stay home and be safe, of course. So I was able to go out into my backyard and wear the protective eyewear and witness the eclipse happening in real time, and it was just amazing. And I was reflecting on what had happened the year before. I had published my first book. And I was thinking back on how it didn't have the splash that I had hoped it would. And so I just, as the eclipse was happening, I sent an intention up to the universe. And I said, you can use me. Take what I have, my skills, my talents, my experiences, professional and personal, use it all to whatever advantage can serve humanity. I'm giving myself over to whatever experiences that you have in line for my life path. And I just left it at that. And then the sun went away and it got dark, and then light came back again. And that was the end of that day. But it wasn't the end of my experience, because in the days and the weeks that followed, little bits of information started to come to me. Sometimes while I'm doing dishes or while I'm walking in nature. And the most famous one, the universe tends to get me when I'm in the shower for some reason. There's just the water, it's
Yeah,
got that
water.
cleansing effect. And, but I'm so far from writing because I started to compile notes and I started to write all these little intuitions of what this new project was going to bring for me. And of course, the project is my newest book, Embrace Your Spark. At the time, I didn't know what it was going to be. I just had a feeling and I started to write. And sometimes I would write a paragraph and then a whole chapter, and soon enough, I had an entire book. But during the process, I can tell you, I did not always agree with what the universe was hinting at. And I'll tell you one moment in particular. So the universe was telling me that I was going to write 6 books. And I'm like, are you crazy? I haven't even written one yet on this project. But I'll get to that part in a little bit. The part that I was pushing back on was one moment when I was once again in the shower and I hear this message, like it's like not hearing with my ears, I hear it, in my mind. And it said that the royalties from the book would be donated to charity. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm donating the profits of the book? It costs money to publish, don't you know? And I would like to recoup my costs and so on. And they just wouldn't let it go. The message was clear that I was going to be donating the profits of the book. And I pushed back on that for a long
I'll
while. And it
bet.
wasn't, I did. And it wasn't until I finally, just gave in and said, fine, we'll do it your way, that I understood who I was going to be donating these profits to. And so all the royalties from the book Embrace Your Spark are going to be donated to organizations that support survivors of sexual assault.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's a full circle moment, and I couldn't see it at the time, but the universe had this plan for me, and it just laid it out one bit after another. And when I was thinking that when I was told I was going to write 6 books, I just couldn't fathom what this was all about. I thought I was going to be writing a book for teachers, and then a book for families, and then a book for adolescents, and then it's like, no, you've got this book here right over your shoulder that's published in English. Now you're going to translate it in French, because I live in a part of the country that is designated bilingual. So in my city, we are a bilingual city. We speak French and English, and in fact, I work in a French language school. And so that's 2 books. But as I was writing this book, organically through the messages and downloads that I was receiving, there are parts of the book that are stories. They're called stories from the heart. They're not case studies. They're actual stories of things that happen in the workplace. Some are heartbreaking, some are beautiful, some are stories of connection, some are stories of breakthrough, and they're just real stories. And so I'm going to invite my colleagues in education to contribute their stories. Tell me what's happening in their classrooms so that we can share that wealth of knowledge to others. So both in French and English, that's now we're up to 4 books. And the fifth and sixth books also developed through this book here that I published just recently, and it's tools from the field. So when you purchase this book, you have access to a free digital download, chock full of lesson plans and activities and games and worksheets, all that you need to develop emotional and relational intelligence in the classroom. And so once again, I'll be inviting my colleagues in education who are already doing beautiful work in their classrooms to share their ideas so that we can spread this knowledge out to other teachers and develop emotional and relational intelligence in classrooms all around.
Wow, that's amazing. So is that one you're working on now? that you're asking the other teachers to contribute to. So that's not published yet. That's in
Not
progress.
published yet. No.
But
This book here was just published in January of this year. So it's been a month, not even been a month. It'll be a month in a couple of days. And so I've taken a little breather, a little step back to regroup. And in the meantime, I'm creating content for social media. I believe I will be working on the translation over the summer when I have a little bit more time off from school. Because right now my full-time job is getting in the way of my passion work.
well, that's exactly what we all go through, right?
Right.
But we find a way. We find a way to
We
make
sure
it
do.
work.
Yeah.
So this is so exciting for people to know that you're going to have this workbook that goes along with it. So again, to clarify, so this book behind you, that's your first book, and it's translated into French. So you have two books from that. Is
Well,
that
this one hasn't been translated yet. That's what I'm going to be working on
oh,
in the
oh,
summer, in the
okay.
summertime.
And then the
Yeah.
second two are because you said there are six total. So what are the second two in French and English?
So it'll be Embrace Your Spark, Stories from the Heart.
Oh,
And then
right, right.
yeah, and then the third spin-off will be Embrace Your Spark, Tools from the Field.
Right, and that's the one that you're going to get the contribution from the other teachers.
Correct.
This is amazing. You are a perfect example of trusting your intuition and listening. I want to investigate a little bit where, because you came from not hearing at all. Now I understand why when suddenly that comes on, I understand it as a hypnotherapist because the subconscious mind is our protector. So we will not remember anything consciously until we're better able to deal with it, to address it and deal with it. So whenever it comes up, then that's the time that we're ready to look at it. So when that first came up for you, did you know that when the first inkling of it came up?
For the creation of this book.
For no, more for your realization of what had happened to you and that you were going to look at what had happened.
hmm I think it's quite a common occurrence that when a woman goes through an experience like a significant breakup, for example, like the demise of my marriage, that it's like this opportunity to reevaluate where you're going from there.
Mhm.
And so for me, that moment kind of opened the door to looking at everything else. I had sought out a therapy for sexual assault in previous years, but didn't stick with it. This time, I was like, I have to do something. My life isn't working the way it is. My life is suffering in my relationships and at work. Things are difficult with workplace violence. I have a daughter who's neurodivergent, so there's a lot of trauma and difficulty there as well. Something's got to give. And so I think it was that catalyst, that the big life shift was like, fine, we're going to unpack everything. We're going to open up the suitcase and we're going to go through everything that works and throw out everything that doesn't, or fix it and put it back in.
Absolutely, because that's interesting that you say that because at that point, that was another trauma in a way that you had to deal with.
Mhm,
But at that point, we question, why is this happening? And therefore, then the subconscious starts giving us the answers. Ask the question, get the answer, right? Why is this
mhm.
happening? So you had mentioned when you first reached out for help that they said the waiting list was a year. And so you did your own stuff, with Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza and other manifesting tools, which we all had a lot of. When did the actual assistance for that therapeutically come into the picture?
So it started during the pandemic when we were at home, and it started online. And so I started a series of treatments, of weekly treatments with a therapist. And we went through some of the history and we talked about how to remain in the body, some of the techniques for calming during crisis or having an anxious moment. And I learned some skills there as well as the ones that I had been learning on my own.
And how did you find that particular therapist? What was the nudge there, and how did that come about? Because you were doing all your other stuff.
Well, it's funny you should ask that question because I started working with one therapist. So the treatment plan was set up as such so that there would be 10 weeks of treatment, 10 weeks of break, 10 weeks of treatment, and so on until we'd reach the end of 30 weeks. So that there was a time for integration as well.
I do.
And so I started the treatment program with one particular therapist,
And how
and
did
then
you
she
find
left.
that? How did you find that therapist though?
She
How
was
did
she
that
was
come
great.
about? How did that
Uh,
come about though? Because there was that break. You tried to get someone and they said that it was a year late, year
mhm.
wait. Did they come back to you after a year and say, okay, someone's available, or did some other little nudge from the universe bring that new person? How did that happen?
Oh, they knew me by name because I called frequently and said, "Where am I on the list? How
Oh,
much
okay.
longer will it
That's what
be?"
I wanted to know. Yeah.
So I kept at it. They knew, well, oh, Linda's calling again. Well, yeah, we're getting closer, Linda. It could be a couple of months now. And so I made sure that they knew I was keen to get some therapy. What the reason or what I was beginning to say was that I had actually started therapy with a particular therapist. And after the 10 weeks, she moved on to another program. So I
Oh,
had to start all over
oh,
again with a different therapist.
oh. Well, that's kind of interesting though, because maybe
Mhm.
and then did you have a different relationship with the
Yes.
second one? Did you see the connection there of why that happened?
Not at the time. No, not at the time. But part of my healing journey was about accepting change. Change is difficult for me. Been through a
Oh,
whole lot of change. So the universe gives you mirrors back to you what you need to work on, and that's something interesting that I learned in Kabbalah as well. I think I mentioned earlier that they don't believe in coincidences, that everything
right.
happens for a reason. And so when I go through these experiences now, when something happens, I rather than react and get emotional, my first thought is to reflect inwards and say, okay, what is this trying to teach me? And my Kabbalah teacher had this great example, and I'd love to share it with your audience.
Please.
Let's say, for example, I would like to have a life of richness. I would like to be very wealthy and have large amounts of money. Well, people who have a lot of money they know how to hold on to their money. They know how to make it grow. They know what to do and what not to do in order to amass great wealth. Now, if I want to have part of that life, then I might have to learn some lessons along the way that will teach me how to have that kind of mindset. So I might have to have an experience where I lose money so that I learn from that mistake and know what not to do later on. And
Very
so I take that mindset into every experience now. So when something silly happens or something disruptive happens in my life, my thought process is okay, what is this trying to teach me? What am I supposed to learn from this experience?
Wow, I love that. And I really want everybody listening to hear this because there again, that's that life is happening for me, not to me. And the
Mhm.
situation is happening for me, not to me. Because in the moment we don't see it, right? We just think, oh, it's bad, or this is good, or this is bad. And I often tell the story to my clients between good and bad of that little tale. I don't know if you've heard it before, but the gentleman, there was a farmer and he had a son. And one day, yeah, on the farm, their horse ran away. And the neighbors said, oh, that's bad. And he said, we'll see. And then the next day, the horse came back with another horse. And so then they said, oh, the neighbor said, oh, this is good. And the farmer said, we'll see. And then the next day, the son tried to ride the horse and fell off and broke his leg. So the neighbor said, oh, this is bad. And the farmer said, we'll see. And then the next day, they came to draft all the young men for the army, and the son couldn't go because he had a broken leg. And so then the neighbor said, oh, this is good. And the farmer said, we'll see. So there's the story of there is no good or bad, right? Everything is happening for a reason. And when we trust that, I like to say to my clients, the work is learning how to respond and not react. And so you're a
Yes.
perfect example of responding to the situation. And I think we can look at responding as in this way. And I just realized this just this moment. This is why I love the interview so much, because when we share these ideas, we learn and grow constantly. And then our audience can say, oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I'm going to use that. I always just looked at it as reacting or responding. But in the way you're describing your story, it's really responding in that way of how is it happening for me? You're responding to what is the lesson? There's an eagerness to it, right? About wow, this is this is exciting. What can I learn from this? How can I grow? So it's such a beautiful transition, of how we used to look at things and be negative or critical or judgmental. And if we don't judge it and we look for the gift in it, then you get the beautiful experience that you just shared with us, which
And
is
can you imagine how our lives would have developed had we learned that when we were young? And this is why
absolutely,
I've taken that knowledge into this new book and into the classroom. I'm, I'm trying to teach children the things that we were never taught, things that would have
absolutely.
made our lives so much easier.
Well, me too, in my book, because I was a young girl and I talk about that young girl and how I felt like a misfit with no working compass. And it took me a long time that if I would have had what you're describing too, we feel like we could have made more progress. So we are doing this service now. Although, if we look at everything as in divine order, we had to go through that and we chose that for the path to be to the point where your book is sitting there and my book is here and we're sharing those journeys with everyone. So it's it's interesting, isn't it? It's beautiful and it's profound, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to comprehend. But right now, our missions are this, and your mission in the school system, where you're right in there with the children, is invaluable. So share with us a little bit in the school, in the classroom, how does this play out? How do you
Well,
work with the children to make this happen? Because I think if we have parents out there that are listening too, that this could really help them with their kids, right?
mhm, mhm. Well, there's a silent crisis happening that is rarely spoken about in education. We hear the headlines about violence in the classroom, about students attacking teachers, students who lack the emotional capacity to self-manage, who don't have the vocabulary to express their needs, and teachers who are doing their very best to support these students with limited resources or support themselves. And we hear these stories in the headlines. One of the stories that we're not talking about are the silent witnesses in the classroom. So when one child is having an explosive behavior, there are 30 other students in the room who are witnessing this alongside that student. And we need to offer supports to them as well. And so I talk about in my book, how are we going to support these students? Of course, we need to give our attention and our love and our support to the student who's at the center of the storm. But that child is not the only one impacted by the strong winds and the big experiences. And I also talk about how can we support educators and teachers, because a calm, emotionally regulated adult is the most valuable asset in any classroom because they set the emotional thermostat for the rest of the room. So, what are we doing as a school community, as policymakers, as parents to ensure teachers have everything they need, everything they require to be that emotionally grounded individual in the classroom? So
Wow.
these are some of the things that I'm discussing in my book. It's not just about nice ideas, being nice or ideas. I'm talking about making big changes, going out to policymakers. And I don't know if you know this, but there are parts in the world, for example, in Denmark, where empathy classes are required for at least 1 hour every week from the time the kids enter the school system until they are at the age of 16. Mandatory empathy classes as part of the curriculum. This is something I want to highlight. I want to bring this to the forefront, make emotional and relational intelligence a priority in our schools, not just something we squeeze in when we have time, not just something we get to if problems arise, but make it part of the curriculum, part of what we're teaching our kids on a weekly basis. But the thing is the curriculum is so jam-packed already. Teachers are required to overtest, to submit scores to policymakers who justify their roles based on test scores and results. We have to reprioritize what's important in our curriculum in order to make space for what really matters. And I think that if we prioritize emotional and relational learning in our schools, it will decrease workplace violence. It will increase workplace joy, and it could only benefit our kids who then go home, share their experiences and their energy with their families and broader community. We're not just changing a classroom, we're changing entire communities when we prioritize emotional learning.
Wow, that is so wonderful. And I believe that's happening. I believe the dynamic is shifting. And as you were describing everything that you just described, um, I've been, what I tell to my clients is everything is energy. And what you said about the
Mhm.
teachers in the classroom, it starts with them. The focus should be first on them so that they're regulating the entire classroom, like you described. And then if they can stay calm and composed, that energy is going to emanate out to all the children. And I also loved what you said. It's not just the child having the meltdown or the reaction or the emotional release, which is healthy, which I know from hypnotherapy. That gets trapped in the muscle memory, the cellular memory, and the DNA. The emotional release is just energy that has to move. And if a child is taught how to release that in a positive manner, then it changes everything. And if the teachers are
Mhm.
holding that energetic space for the emotional regulation, and the children are taught that this is all part of their makeup, and if they're taught about compassion and empathy, like you said, it's so much more well rounded. And I believe they are. I believe that there's a shift happening and less is being stressed on the test scores. I just saw something recently on a newscast about the children in China. Do you know they have to go to school from 7:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night?
I did not know that, but that's a long school day.
Everything is predicated on the scores and getting into this certain testing system. And it showed pictures of the children sleeping on their desks and
Oh.
children crying, and that too much, and they were saying too much emphasis is on the test scores, and that there has to be a balance and there has to be more about their emotional life. This was just discussed. So you're right on time with everything you're doing and bringing that education to the masses and to schools. Tell us how is that happening, do you think? I know with your books, this is great because it's getting it out there, but in your actual classroom, is that shared with other classrooms in other communities in your area, or how is that happening?
Well, that's the hope. The hope is that this will become a widespread will be accessible on a more grander level. But I have the great fortune of working in a school where educators are working together. We have a beautiful team, a beautiful synergy, and it's not uncommon for students to see the adults hugging each other in the hall. We normalize emotions. We allow our students to live their experiences, and we support one another. We have an amazing leader who also is very empathetic and has great compassion, and so it shows in the way we interact with our students and with our staff. Now, it's not like this everywhere, and I know sometimes teachers will say, "Well, great, I can do this emotional work in my classroom, but unless my school leader is on board, or unless the Ministry of Education is on board, what good will it do?" Well, to that I would say, what you do in your classroom matters. You can do amazing emotional work without top-down endorsement. Of course, that's what we're striving for. At least that's what I'm pushing for, is that we can get the government and policymakers on board to make space for it in the curriculum. But
Mhm.
even in spite of this, teachers and education workers can do really beautiful emotional work within their classrooms. And we talked about energy before, right? We talked, with the heart-brain coherence and how we have this magnetic field that extends beyond our bodies and interacts with the magnetic fields of other people's bodies. This is neuroscience. It's not woo-woo. It's been
Real.
proven, right? And so whatever you're doing in your classroom doesn't stay contained within your classroom. Those little bodies that leave the door at the end of the day or go out into the schoolyard and play with other students, they're spreading that beautiful energy outwards. And so I would say, even if you don't have a school leader who's on board, do the work. Do it anyway. The kids will benefit from it. You will benefit from it. And so will their families and so many more.
Well, that is so, what an awesome point. Because right, if the and that's the saying, you have to start somewhere. You have to start where you are. That's where you are, that's where you start. And if you're doing it in your classroom, and then those children are going home to their families also. Their
Hmm.
families are also benefiting from it, and they're going to feel the shift. And then they may go to work and deal with their colleague differently, the parent, let's say. And then that colleague may go home, and so it's just like a big web. It's going to get out there. And then when more people actually see it happening in your own little school, in your own little community, it's going to be much easier, I believe, to get the powers that be, you know, on board with regulating it, having it more like saying, okay, we're going to add it to the curriculum, the empathy, that this is important because the energy will have already shifted, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, one of the guiding ideas that I had when I was preparing this project was I was looking at our current world leaders, and I was thinking to myself, gosh, where is the compassion? Where is the empathy, the cooperative skills? It's not obvious. And then I realized, if we want better leaders for tomorrow, we have to show them how. We have to build these leaders up today so that when they get into these positions of leadership, they already know how to resolve conflict peacefully. They know how to communicate and identify needs and ask for what they want and listen attentively to others to understand, not just to respond. And, conflict management is one of those things that is always coming up in every classroom. We're managing little disputes between students, and it's tiresome and it drains our emotional battery and it takes up useful classroom time. And then you have the weight of, oh, I have to get this lesson done and report cards are due and I don't have time to deal with this. But that is why it's so important. We need to teach children how to resolve conflict peacefully. They don't you don't naturally know how to do this. Just like cooperative work. We have sometimes assignments where kids can do it on their own, and then we have group assignments or assignments where they're paired up. But we also have to teach how to work cooperatively alongside the project because kids don't instinctively know how to work together. There are so many missing components to our curriculum, and emotional work has to be a priority.
It absolutely has to be, and I believe in that 1,000,000%. And even from my days as a teacher with the children, right, musically, and sharing with them and teaching them how, teaching them. We're teaching them by our example how what's appropriate and what's not. And in the classroom, if they learn it as young children and they're taking, empathy class, compassion class, then they get to be the adult, like you just said, that's in a position of leadership. They already know how to do it.
hmm And it's not a new concept. We've had social emotional learning in our schools for quite some time now, and it's whoever the organizations and people who brought this to the forefront did an amazing job of showing its importance. Now it's time to take that to another level. It's time to incorporate emotional and relational intelligence across all subjects, across the entire day, in every part of the school experience, not just in an isolated lesson that
Right.
is easily forgotten. But in those moments of a schoolyard fight where two kids are arguing over a soccer game, let's stop that soccer game. Let's take a moment to look at the human in each other and understand what's happening in the other person's perspective. And let's teach these children how to resolve that conflict peacefully in the moment, because we can learn about it as a lesson. But then when the heat of the moment happens, it's easily forgotten. So we
Wow.
need to continue this as a school life experience, not just an isolated lesson.
Wow, that's really true. And in the moment, making what the children are experiencing more important than the game or the score of the game, right? Like you said, stop the
Mhm.
game and in the moment address it because that's the only place we can address it. Because if we don't, all those emotions are still roiling around. And the longer we delay them, we know what happens from your,
Mhm.
from what you, described to us that, we get to a point where it has to be expressed and it has to be resolved.
Yeah, going back to what I said earlier about giving teachers what they need in
Mhm.
order to do this work, this comes down to it, right? The time and the space to do emotional work. Because if they're worried about the next lesson or the next thing that has to happen, we're rushing through this really important work because they feel the pressure to perform and get their students to perform as well. So there needs to be a shift in that area as well.
Can you do that, or can you do that now organically, or does it have to, will it have to come to a point where the class, like a certain class, is just cut right out so you can replace it with something that's more emotionally in line with what you need? Or can you shorten classes so that you can add it? How do you see that happening?
Those are really great questions, and I don't necessarily have the answers to those. However, I ask questions about what do we need as a school? What do we need as a community? What do we need as a province or a country or a state? Because just like each student is unique in their needs, so is every school community. So I think it will be up to individual entities to decide what works best for them. But I think it's a yes and a both and, because we can do really great emotional work with what we have now.
Mhm.
Will it be better if we make space and have top-down endorsement? Yes, of course it will be. But we can still do this great work instead, even if it's just like having that have a whole chapter on the power of the circle. And it's really inspired by the indigenous people and how they use circle communities to problem solve and really give an opportunity for everyone to have a voice. In our experience, like we use this strategy in our school once a week or once every 2 weeks. We bring the kids together in circle and we discuss problems. We discuss things that are happening within the school community, but we can use those moments not just to highlight issues, but also to talk about things like what does it feel like when you're stressed? How does it feel in your body? What shows up for you? How do you manage stress? And really allow the children to have a voice and talk about how they're feeling. They really crave this kind of work. They'll even ask, when's our next circle time? Because they're excited for it. They enjoy having an opportunity to express emotions. And we need to give them more time to do that.
That is so beautiful because yes, of course they want it because they're being heard. They're being
Hmm.
acknowledged for their emotional being instead of just they're this
Yeah.
thing that has to produce X amount of scores and grades to pass
Hmm.
some test like those poor little Chinese children. I felt such compassion. They were just weeping and you could see the anxiety. You know, this is a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. And do the parents come to that too? Do you have one that like a circle night that the parents could do too, either
That's a
with
great idea.
children.
I'm going to make a note of that.
Yeah,
But for
either.
now, it's done within the classroom community to build a good classroom culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because remember when we were kids, I remember they would sometimes have the parent nights where parents would just go, because then it would give the parents an opportunity to voice their feelings about maybe what their children are bringing home, some issue.
Mhm.
And then the parents would be able to be heard. And then once the parents could be heard, then maybe it could be a child and parent night,
Beautiful.
right?
I love it.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
It would be really beautiful.
And it
Yeah.
wouldn't have to be every month, all three, but it could be one month could be the kids, the next month could be the parents, and then the third month could be parents and children. It could be like three times a month, not like 3 weeks a month or once a month. I don't know.
Mhm.
You can figure all that
Yeah.
out, but
Thinking out loud, right? It really depends on what your school community can hold. And like those kinds of formal experiences are wonderful, but it doesn't also have to be just formal experiences. It can happen organically throughout the day. When kids are misbehaving or they're off task or they need to be told to go back to work, these are things that we'll say frequently, and we don't pay as much attention to the kids who are doing things well. We'll praise them less. But if we really focus on emotional labor as something worthy of praise, like we had a student yesterday, for example, walked by a piece of trash, just bent over and picked it up and put it in the trash. Wasn't their trash, they just went and did that. That was an opportunity for me to congratulate them for their emotional labor. That was really beautiful. I'm so glad that you did that. Thank you for caring enough about our classroom to keep it clean. Little moments like this, little micro moments that take 30 seconds to do, create such a beautiful atmosphere of togetherness and emotional support within the classroom. Just those micro moments of acknowledging emotional labor make all the difference.
wow, yeah, it's positive affirmation. You're acknowledging the child,
Hmm.
which of course they didn't even expect it, but the
Yeah,
fact that you noticed and that you acknowledged that, said how told them, that and praised them for it. It's I mean, people are like that, animals are like that. If the dog does what we taught them, then we give them a treat, right? Or we
right.
pat them, or we say good boy, or good girl.
Yeah.
So we're all sentient beings that appreciate being acknowledged and being appreciated, right? So it
Hmm.
sounds like you're doing amazing, amazing work. And I suspect that a lot of this amazing work has happened. I don't just suspect, I know, because of the inner work that you have done through your own trauma and coming out the other side. It shows in what you're creating now in your service with the children, and now it sounds like with the parents too, because you can add that element, and then that's your community, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I would say that my experiences have influenced the way I interact with my work and my students to a very high degree. What's important for me now, more important than it used to be, is that kids feel emotionally safe within the classroom, within the school, and within my presence. Where before I might not have paid as much attention to it, now it's uh, at the forefront of what I'm trying to accomplish when I'm with my students.
And it's so beautiful and it's so greatly needed. Thank you so much for your amazing service. I mean, this is such a huge, huge thing that has been overlooked. And the fact that I just saw the China story makes it even more important to know that
Yeah.
all these children, and if this energy goes out, like a big wave, you start in your little community, it's going to explode. So, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. We've been talking for an hour.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yes, it certainly does. But before we leave, I want you to tell everybody where they can find you, where they can learn more about your work, learn more about where they can get your book, and maybe help their own children, or if there's teachers out there, our group, teachers or parents or anybody who wants to learn more about Linda's amazing, amazing work.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me this privilege. So you can find me on my website, embraceyourspark.ca. If you'd like to reach out by email, you can find me at embracingthespark@gmail.com. And my book, Embrace Your Spark, A Guide to Emotional and Relational Intelligence in the Classroom, is available on Amazon. And with every purchase, all royalties will be donated to survivors of sexual assault. So when you're purchasing the book, you're not only helping your classroom, you're also helping me make a difference in my community.
That is so beautiful, Linda. Well, thank you so much for your amazing service. It's an amazing opportunity, and I'm humbled and honored to have been able to have this conversation with you today. It's beautiful, beautiful work, and it's so greatly needed in our world. So thank you, my dear, for the difference you're making for all of humanity. It's greatly appreciated.
And thank you once again from the bottom of my heart for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you and speak with your community. And together, we're going to make a difference.
We're going to, we are.
We are. Let's affirm it. Speak it into existence.
Right, right. We're already doing it. We're absolutely doing it. So, thank you everyone for joining for this another amazing Intuition Incubator interview with the magnificent, magnificent Linda Rodgers. We love you. So,
Oh, thank
please,
you.
please, everybody, spread the word if you know anybody, with children or teachers in school and parents, because this woman is doing exactly what we need for our children.
Mm,
So
thank
thanks.
you.
Thank you so much for your amazing service. And thank you everyone for being here. And we will see you at another beautiful, beautiful Intuition Incubator interview again real soon. Bye, everybody. Bye, Linda. Thanks
Bye.
so much.